With the regional economy showing few signs of recovery, local artists and arts organizations are really taking it on the chin.
Have mercy!
Almost every organization, from the biggest to the fringiest, is feeling the pain and cutting back its budget. What's art, and those who make it, worth to us as a society?
Take away all the pain.
To the commercial end, I think that consolidation in the last
Take away.
We're talking about art and money for people who are just joining us. Sandy Cioffi is a filmmaker, Barbara Thomas an artist, Dave Rosencrans works at Experience Music Project and has worked in the music industry 15, 20 years? 15 years. I don't want to age you beyond your years. There's commercial and non-commercial. Do they join at some point in this city, those worlds of artists, the folks who are working in a semi-commercial industry and the ones who are working in home studios?
It's a small town.
Yeah.
But what do you mean by commercial and non-commercial?
Well, musicians, for example, record labels are an artistic industry. Movie distributors, there's a lot of location scouts in the city and working in the film industry, and yet I don't think you can separate them out from the filmmakers or the distributors from the musicians necessarily. But I think traditionally, pop music in particular has been thought of as a commercial art form.
Oh, yeah.
I guess I could ask the musicians whether they feel the same way.
Sure.
They might disagree, yeah.
It depends on how much food they have in the cupboard that day, probably, or how their relations are with their record label on that particular day, whether they're artists or whether it's their job, you know.
Well, Barbara, have you, over the course of your time, let's say over the last 10 years, have you personally seen the effects of the economic downturn?
Well, you know, I guess I'm probably the one person here who I feel like the actual commercial outlet for painting, drawing, sculpture is sometimes kind of under the table more than it is. I mean, because every artist doesn't have a gallery, which would be your outlet, and every artist who's if you don't have a gallery, then where's your commercial outlet? You know, where's your commercial outlet? You know, we've always sort of been off the commercial outlet basis that way.
You do have a gallery, though.
I do have a gallery, and it's. I always think of it as my pie, my income pie. It's kind of a quarter of my income pie.
Do you have to work what I'm thinking of as a day job?
I have another job. I have lots of jobs. Someone said, "Oh, you're a professional talker." I talk. I get paid for that sometime. I do some limited teaching, and then I make my artwork, and then I write. And so those are my pieces of my pie, and I have to do all those things.
I mean, I think the commercial, non-commercial conversation in Seattle is, I think, a little bit in some ways like other places in the country, and in other ways it's really unique. Because I think the aspects of the music business that succeeded here, and the aspects of film, succeeded by financial standards. I don't mean by artistic standards.
Right.
That we're certainly not the place that the world comes to make big commercials. I mean, there are some commercials that get made here, but that's certainly not what we're about. But we are about something else, and we could, I think, if we were smart, we could grow that identity intentionally in terms of the sort of maybe what would be classically called edgier aspects of the music and film business. But I'm really lucky in that I can do what I love and sometimes make money at it in a way that perhaps a painter can't. And I think that makes film and music a little bit different.
Well, who's the we you're talking about? If we were smart, we could grow it.
We, the arts community?
We the citizens in general, the populace, the sort of body politic, that if we as city people said, in terms of the love of our community and the identity of Seattle, we would understand the value of intentionally growing this.
Okay. Well, before we get to that, I want to talk about, you differentiated between financial and artistic success. Now, Dave, you worked for a company that was, at the time, I don't know if Sub Pop is financially successful anymore, but it was when you were working there. And I would guess at least some of you felt it was artistically successful at the same time. At least I would hope so.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, we were also aware of the fact that the music industry, probably even more than the film industry, is an awful lot about luck too. I mean, yeah, we had great bands. Yeah, we did a lot of smart things to promote the bands. But come on, we hit a pot of gold, and rode for a number of years off of that. And what was important to us, I guess, was the idea that we would try to reinvest that and reinvent ourselves and grow other smaller bands at the same time with it.
Well, that has happened so much because there was this idea of Seattle's sound. I don't know if that. The bands that I hear are all over the place. There's bands I like and bands I don't like. But
that's always been the way with this town, though. I mean, it's really always been eclectic. I mean, even during the 2 or 3 years of the grunge heyday, when everybody was in such a way actually trying to sound the same, it was still really eclectic. There's a lot of things going on, and I think the people who live in this community understand that. I'm not sure that people outside of the community have that same perception.
Well, that got me to wondering if there is like a cohesive overall arts community. In the community is Seattle and its club goers and record buyers and music lovers. Does the film community overlap with the music community? Do the visual artists? Do you, it's a small town, but can you say it's one arts community?
I actually don't think so. I think that in terms of, at least speaking for myself, what I do in my spare time, I dip into your community, but in terms of working together on sort of a commercial level or creating things or sort of trying to find some merger between our different industries, I think that goes back in a way to your comment that we could be smarter and we could grow this, our overall business in a way that would be helpful to everybody that I don't think we're doing.
But, while I agree with you completely, I actually think in terms of the non-commercial aspect of the art community, I always get surprised by new groups that I haven't heard about, or a young artist or even an older artist I haven't heard of. Wow, where'd they come from? Because I sometimes think for such a big city, it's kind of a fishing village. And I sometimes am amazed that I see the same people in a good way over and over. But as you said, it's something I'm doing in my spare time, or committees I'm serving on, or just interests I care about, that I'm dipping back and forth in through many aspects of the arts community, but not necessarily commercially, more so as an extracurricular activity. I think that's true.
Well, I wondered more if the arts community existed in terms of a power block or a political force or a unit to go to the mayor and say X, Y, or Z. I don't see it that way.
No, I really don't, and
all.
actually not at all. And also, I think that when you say community, there is a part of the community that is political. Whether you're talking about the Allied Arts or the Arts Alliances and those people that have various, and they work that way. But when I think of it, people are like, well, where's the arts community? I always think of like, well, those are the people you sit around and talk about your ideas with, and and you're coming up with some sort of cross fertilization, and I think for myself, I said, well, maybe I'm just so much older that, and I actually never did that, but I know I've heard of it, and I know the rumor of what that is, and I think that where I see the economic pressure prevents that in a sense, because people are doing so many things to make their lives hang together. So the idea that you'd sit around in a cafe and talk about existentialism or whatever artists would be talking about at their time, I just don't think that happens much. And
some of that could be cultural too. In my experience, some of that's a West Coast, East Coast thing.
East Coast, you sit around and talk about existentialism, Mark?
I was a philosophy major, so yeah. No, not necessarily that, but more like the understanding of the power block of family. We're in an Italian restaurant, right? We should go there. There's more of an understanding of people. We're marginalized, and we don't need to complain about that, but we sure better be strong, and we better be crafty and influential, and we should get together over bottles of big red wine and do that.
Well, one of the things that I've thought about for many years is this idea that Seattle has this identity outside itself for producing all kinds of art, music for sure, but performing art, visual art, theater. Seattle has an international theater reputation. But I wondered from within if what the value of arts are to the community, and I'm not talking about to the arts community, I'm talking to the people who are either the consumers or the non-consumers of arts. Is there any value to having all this stuff here? and not economic, just
You must wonder sometimes, huh?
Well, I mean, this is a big topic, I think. I wonder what you both think of this. In my experience, when I was a newly New York filmmaker, I had more cachet, even though in the 10 years that I've been here, I've done a ton of work. And I've done that as a Seattle person. When I walk into my classroom to teach students, I'm just a Seattle person, so I can't really mean much in a way. Whereas if I did the very project that I just came off of, and I came here as a guest speaker, I'd be a big deal. And I wonder what that, if that's true of all smaller market cities, or if that's just us, that we don't love our own or sort of grow our own mid-career people. Like, we're good with the 20-year-olds who eat ramen noodles. But what about, the graying ones of us who want to have a mid-career?
Yeah, I think both is true. I think that's probably, there's some human nature in that dynamic that's probably true of all smaller markets, as you put it. But I totally lost my train of thought.
Barbara, I'm kind of, you go outside of, all of you go outside of this place, and I don't know about the reputation of the visual arts community, but there are some notable figures. You go out into the world. Do you think that we, as Sandy said, that we value ourselves less than?
I think that's exactly true. I think it's exactly true. And I don't know, I guess I can't say why it is. I can't say why it is, except that I guess being from here and watching that dynamic, I think, well, maybe it's because, they see us walking down the street, so we can't possibly be magic or whatever.
No, but if you're in LA, for example, if you go to Hollywood and you see a television star, I think people still go nuts in LA. That's George Clooney. We have to go over and talk to him. I guess, do people go, it's Barbara Thomas?
Oh, well, yeah.
Go.
Every minute I'm
Maybe they
fighting
don't
them
know you
off
did,
at the
but-
QFC.
They do that for musicians, don't they? They're still stars. Are there any stars here?
I don't know. I haven't seen one lately. I don't know what happens. Like if Eddie Vedder walks down the street, I don't know. Does he? I'm not sure.
I don't
I'm not
know.
picking on Eddie. But going back to the point of this sort of undervalue, if you're local and a mid-career artist, I think that's really true, and I've seen that not only in organizations that I've worked with, but other organizations where there's sort of this attitude like, well, you're local, you want to work with me, and so you don't mind taking half as much as we pay somebody if they were from New York, right? That's okay, right?
No, but yeah,
Okay, well,
that's
good.
the question.
No, that happens all the
All the
time,
time.
And so then you wonder why an artist leaves town and moves to New York, a photographer.
Well, we
or
export
whatever.
genius every day in this town. We do. We're exporting it right and left. I'm deeply concerned that we're doing it even where I teach. We just train people in this wonderful way. And, a dear friend of mine, Lauren Wienman, who's talented writer, actress, she left to go to New York and do her thing and is in LA now and, comes back occasionally. But I think certainly would have loved to stay in Seattle were it possible for her to have stayed in Seattle. She's just a teeny example.
So that's putting a dollar value on the appreciation. We moved into that arena. There's one thing to be appreciated and to say, you're a wonderful person and I'm so glad you're here. It's another thing to say, you're a wonderful person, I'm so glad you're here, and I'm going to let you make a living doing what you're good at.
Well, the thing I want, because we were here to talk about artist support, and because I'd like to hear what your idea of what is art support, and we're talking about, okay, what happens in the just the general economic world, but I think, say, with what visual artists and a lot of individual artists do, it's like it's a constant competition. I told someone, even if you get picked to go to the bathroom, it's like, you got picked for that? Is there something that you can do that you can get paid for just because you're good at what you do? Aside, you can teach, you can do whatever, but in a sense, I think that's the part that I find the most troubling.
Well, that brings up that, are you owed a living if you're an artist?
Well, I think that, I don't think I'm owed a living, because that sort of somehow indicates that you're not doing anything for that living.
Well, it's the entitlement issue.
Yeah.
Republicans would simply say that that's I think that they would, and I think that's what we have to be prepared to counteract. And I think there's some very good arguments to counteract that, and I think that's a preposterous way of thinking, but I think that's what they would say. There's a bunch of people with their hand out who expect to be paid to sit around and have more sex than anyone, drink in the middle of the day. I think they really think
Really?
that. I think they really think that I do, that we sit around and expect something to be paid.
And even on top of that, though, I think people who, you pick the Republicans, let's, call the Democrats out, or people who would consider themselves to be sensitive to the arts community, they're also quick to create a real division between the high arts and the low arts.
Oh, that's a very good point.
They'll send a check to the opera, but will they send a check
Right.
to Wiggly World?
That's
You
such a
know?
good point.
And so you're battling on all fronts to get people to understand what the actual process is and both the real connection and the potential connection between these different organizations, and the fact that those of us who work at these organizations or who are artists involved with these organizations, we cross all those boundaries all the time, but it may not be understood or valued in that economic sense.
You brought up 2 points, and one is the artists and organizations. Barbara's an individual artist. Sandy's an individual artist. You work at an organization that's about music, do you have to attach yourself to one of those organizations in order to get support, or can you make it on your own? And I'm not talking about the EMP, which is a museum, and it's not a symphony, which would be a commissioner of music and a presenter of live music, or a theater company, or I don't know what else.
And the addendum to
cinema.
that is what a lot of individual artists have done in the last 5 years, which is that the individual has become an organization.
Yeah.
Many individuals have said,
Yeah.
well, since there's no funding left for individuals, I'll simply call myself a 501c3. It's the Paul Simon song, right? Why don't we get together and call ourselves an institute? Everyone's getting together to call themselves an institute because then they're potentially fundable.
By who, though? There's no money to be, at least not that I've seen lately.
It's very tough. I think your point about the opera and Wiggly World is so well taken, and it brings up this question about many things, one of which is how fundamentally anti-democratic and undemocratic it is that we allow just the philanthropists to sort of choose when there's no formal structure. We've eroded the formal structure every year, chipped away, so there's less and less. Even the paltry grants you're talking about that we all compete, like the night before it's due at Kinko's, everyone's there. And it's a party at Kinko's the night before the grants are due. But even those are shrunk to such a small amount that you're down to individual women caprice of people who say, okay, the opera, instead of a pot of
Right.
money that we decide as a plebiscite where it goes.
Well, I think, though, that I would like to think back further and further is like, what do we think? I think we're assuming that we all know what art support is and what it would feel like if we were getting it. And I don't know if that's true. I think that there's this sort of dream of art support, and then there's this reality of art support.
So what would your dream of art support be?
Well, I think that if I had my dream, I would still do a lot of different things that I know that I would be scrambling for, but maybe there would be one place, like Sandy was saying, you made it to your mid-career and you've got this track record, and there's some place where you pick that you'd like to, make your mark, that there would be the place where the support or the financial whatever might come in. And it might not be on an ongoing thing. I'm not saying every year I think that the city should put $20,000 into my life. No, but I think that if in fact I was going to vie for that, or I'll just do what I'm doing now and be my own MacArthur.
Well, that's interesting, because as that pot of public dollars dwindles, the arts are competing with social services and cops and jails and teachers and all those kinds of things. But really, at this point, it's social services, and any time that they go through this budget process, I think the mayor just cut another 3.7% out of arts and is not restoring the admissions tax to the Arts Commission budget. So there's less money overall, no prospect of more money, and then you look over there and you see the guy living in the cardboard box. What do you do, and how do you justify that what you do is as important as making sure that guy has a dry place to sleep and is vaccinated against TB and pneumonia and the flu and get some food?
Well, I guess, you asked what value do you think
Yeah.
artists are to a city? And I think it's imagination, because I really do feel like because a lot of what we do is kind of underneath, even though you can get paid for what you do because you make these films and you make music, that when you start to say, I'm going to really make something happen, you have to come up with new and different ways of how to make it happen, because you're not going to have that grant, you're not going to have this. And in a sense, you show the city what you do with nothing, because that's what we're about. We're about making something happen with nothing on a blank sheet of paper. And that's how I have to think about it. It's not that I condone it, but I also think I live in the United States. We don't support our old people, our kids, and I don't necessarily think someone's going to support me. I'm just saying that the system we have is so piecemeal.
Go ahead.
Well, this whole notion of making something out of nothing, and I have to be really careful when I say something on behalf of an artist, because I don't earn my living making art or selling art. I have a job, and I'm very fortunate to have that job, and I want to make that distinction.
Right.
But the thing that works against an artist, I think, is that making something out of nothing. It's like, well, if you can make it out of nothing, keep making it out of nothing. You don't need anything. You can make it out of nothing.
How many times have you heard that artists they're going to keep making their art because they're
no matter
driven?
What.
It doesn't matter. They're passionate.
But I think we could flip that argument on its head too and say the infrastructure of everything that does not. One of the things that gets really frustrating is when people say, "Well, did you bring money in? Was it marketable?" You say, "Well, the 520 hasn't brought any money in yet. There's no toll booth there. So the things cost a whole heck of a lot of money. But obviously we all know the value to the economy of the 520. Well, I believe that you can just as craftily define the value of the creative and the art life, the community life that we've all led, and what that means in dollars and cents.
Well, this Professor Richard Florida from Carnegie Mellon University has been traveling around the country making that argument, which some people don't agree with, but his argument is he's measured, he has set up all these standards, and that there's cities that have concentrations of what he calls cultural infrastructure, and he's talking about high culture and he's talking about street level culture, are going to attract what he thinks of as creative entrepreneurial minds, a word that you didn't use, but a word that you meant, that artists are creators, they're people who invent, they're people who are going to jumpstart your economy and attract more people here. People don't agree, but that's...
But see, when I said the thing about I'm going to make something, but I did mean also that I was going to make money. I didn't mean that I was just going to go and cut off my ear and make whoopee. I'm going to make money because I need to have that, and that's part of what I meant.
So you're inventive.
Yeah. So I will have to be inventive again, and I wanted to say a couple of things about even what the government, while it can't say give money as much as it has been able to do, I think where it's placed now and what it needs to be doing is really modeling for the private sector about what it is they've been supporting all these years. If we really, again, if we really think that's valuable, and I think in a sense, like say, let's think about what 1% has done.
The public art
program. What it has done, it's modeled for many of the architectural firms that you can include an artist in your group, and it doesn't even have to come through us. You can just include an artist, and I think that kind of thing, so that there are places in El Gauchos, I'm sure there's something I can do over there that I might consider to be art, and that might somehow.
And you'd be getting paid.
Being paid to do it.
It's interesting because music and film, a little bit different than visual art, have been embraced by these economists as jump starters for the economy. The city has this commission of Office of Economic Development under which pop music and film fall. There was an attempt to, make y'all one, but it didn't happen, and so those are seen as having a price tag on them, having a dollar value.
Yeah, but this is the same city that for how many years had a poster ban, to prevent advertising the bands that were being, were creating this revolutionary worldwide movement that was carrying the Seattle name and the Seattle brand everywhere, and it's like, no, you can't put that poster up because it's urban blight.
Well, that goes back to what you're talking about, is getting together and making... I mean, you're not talking about cultural tourism, are you?
No.
Okay.
That concerns me, that phrase. because I think you can quickly, when you use that phrase and that philosophy, I think you can make yourself vulnerable to the bread and roses argument that you brought up earlier, which I think is another one of the traps that we have to be prepared, because it isn't true that funding the arts is there's this piece of pie and either I fund the arts or I vaccinate homeless people. That is simply not the case. I mean, one of the things that we have to do is formally, as an arts community, I think be a whole lot better. And I think that this moment of crisis could be bright in this way. I think that we are going to have to come together, and I think I've seen the beginnings of this, to say we have to be lobbyists at this point. Let's get serious, down and dirty, good old-fashioned East Coast politics, and lobby about this stuff. We should have been much stronger on lobbying on the admissions tax. And I mean, there's no question that we have to take responsibility for the fact that we didn't change minds about that. We should have. It was a good law, and it should continue. We live in a ridiculously anti-tax environment. It's frightening, and artists have to be part of shifting that. That's our responsibility.
So be political.
Absolutely.
Be organized.
Well, and that's also, but I think in a sense, to figure out how you can transfer that responsibility during your life, because I know as someone who's worked in organizations, that can be your life. Mm-hmm. And if you get good at it, then you are called on a lot to do that thing. But how to, because I think that's another thing, is how do you transfer that kind of viewpoint to people that are, a decade younger and then a decade younger, because that's what I think we don't have. Because I sit somewhere and so I say to someone, well, the Arts Commission programs, and a young woman said to me, well, that doesn't mean anything to us anymore. That's not how we get our money. And that's not how, that's just for the...
So I'm not going to think about lobbying to keep
or
it
yeah,
from being
that's
cut?
just kind of the... I said, honey, don't you understand that in 1974 there was no conduit at all in the culture for that to happen here, and there isn't that transfer of history. And it's the same people that say to me that, and I'm not going to say about affirmative action. I said maybe it shouldn't be just the way it is or has been, but that was long fought for. So you need to figure out how you keep the concept inside.
Well, that's an interesting point, because there's a lot of reinvention of the wheel. Mm-hmm. Everything's new, and it seems so unique, and yet. Mm-hmm. So how does that happen? Do you have an idea for that?
Well, I think that having there be a community, or at least someplace where you would be able to go and so, okay, I've got this. Can I give this to you now? I want to give away some of that information.
I actually have an idea.
Oh, good.
This is my throw down the gauntlet challenge to some of the really wonderfully generous philanthropists who have started their own foundations for their own goals. Instead, take 2 years and make that a democratic process. Take the same pot of money and actually allow the community to determine how it will deal with that pot of money instead of picking their own pet projects. So democratize philanthropy. And let Seattle be on the map for democratizing philanthropy in the arts, in the cultural life, in the economic life of the city. Let us actually figure out, back to the good old boiler room, let's figure out how to democratize philanthropy.
But you don't think that's already happened with the arts commissions? You don't think that's what they were trying to do?
They have, because of the kind of environment that we're in, they have no pot of money anymore. That was the original attempt.
Right.
And a lot of the models they created, Marcy's point, which is really well taken, take those models. They've been created. They're great. A lot of the way, I've served on those grants panels. Some of them are very well done.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Let's take their wisdom, and now where the real pot of money is outside of the guise
Government.
of any kind of democracy. So democratize philanthropy.
And you get the last word, because here we are at Marcos, and they're going to open the doors and start selling meals now. So thank you all for just opening the door a little bit on this conversation. There's so much more to talk about.
Somebody please make me happy.